Hey guys, God bless you. You are tuned into Bible Wise Money. My name is Carlos, and with this episode, we're going to start talking about debt and the nature of debt. Come inside the video, we'll talk all about it. So hopefully you tuned in to the last 3 episodes where we talk specifically about consumerism. And what I want to do in this episode and the following 2 episodes is pivot just a bit and show the connection between consumerism and debt. I describe consumerism as a rocket and debt is the fuel. If you only had consumerism without debt, you would have a lot of people who want to do things and want to buy a lot of things, but they would not have the means to do it. They would just be a lot of frustrated people if you only had consumerism without debt. And if you only had debt without consumerism, you'd have a lot of people who want to loan you money, banks and credit card companies, but you wouldn't want anything. You'd say, no, that's okay. I don't need a loan. No, that's okay. I don't need that store credit card. No, that's okay. You can hang on to your money. I have everything that I need. But when you put the two together, you have consumerism and you have debt. It's a volatile mixture and it'll keep most of us from reaching any financial goal that we will ever set. The scripture that I want to use for this episode and the next 2 episodes comes from the book of Proverbs, chapter 22 and verse number 7. And this principle says, the rich rule over the poor and the borrower is slave to the lender. So let me give you my own personal debt story. In about a 3-year period, I accumulated over $40,000 in credit card debt. One of the ways to put that in context is my take-home pay back then was probably about $4,000 a month, let's say. And my monthly credit card payments, I believe I had 11 credit cards. The minimum payments on those credit cards was $1,600 a month. And the interest rate on those credit cards was about $900 a month just in interest alone. Back then, I had a studio apartment. My rent was only $480 a month. So think about it. My interest payments every single month were twice as much as my rent payments. Think about it another way. My monthly credit card payments, $1,600, were more than 3 times what I paid for rent. And even though I was bringing home probably $4,000 a month, almost half of what I was bringing home was going towards credit card debt. It took me 3 years to get into credit card debt. It took me over 20 years to get out of credit card debt. So in my experience, it's very easy to get into debt. It is very difficult to get out of debt. Does not happen quickly at all. And the reason lenders are always so willing to give us money is they want our interest payments. They want their money back. They want the principal back, but they want to extract from you and me the interest payments. There's nothing a credit card company desires more than a person who will make steady payments on time with lots and lots of interest. Although I'm dedicating 3 episodes specifically to debt, it's not enough to adequately teach on the topic. Matter of fact, this topic of debt, there are YouTube channels that are dedicated specifically and solely to debt. There are television programs, there are radio programs that deal specifically with debt, especially how to get out of debt once you've gotten yourself into trouble with debt. So this issue with debt is huge in this country. So I want to, number one, in this episode, I want to give you a little bit of a background on debt and just kind of set the stage for some of the other things that we're going to talk about in the next 2 episodes. And just as I did with the consumerism episodes, my desire is to kind of open your eyes, to show you something that maybe you've never seen before, because I believe that once you see it for the first time, you cannot unsee it. And hopefully that'll help either get you on a track to getting out of debt, if debt is an issue, or avoiding it before it's too late. So let's talk a little bit about the history of debt. After the Second World War, there was an economic boom, and it was largely spearheaded by a boom in housing. And so the initial push of debt really began right after the Second World War in the second half of the 1940s. And it continued, and it continues to this very day. And so back then in the late 1940s, the average American household only had about $500 in debt, aside from a mortgage. Starting in the 1970s, we had a new form of debt that came along, and you are very aware of it. It's called credit card debt. Believe it or not, before the 1970s, most people really didn't have credit cards, and credit cards were not the issue back then. It's certainly in the 60s and before that they are now. You had MasterCard, you had Visa, you had Discover, you had American Express, you had this rise in store credit cards. You can get a Sears card all of a sudden. You can get a store card, goodness, for almost anything. You can get like a Buffalo Wild Wing credit card. So if you're having a craving for hot wings and you just don't have cash, you can just pull out your Buffalo Wild Wing card. Actually, the most recent statistics from the end of 2020 show that the average household owes over $92,000 in debt. And that debt is over $5,000 in credit card debt. It's over $16,000 in personal loan debt. It's over $19,000 in auto loans, student loans over $38,000, home, and then home related about $250,000. Now, not everyone owns a home, but for those who do, on average, about $250,000. So you average all that out altogether, the average U.S. American owes, they don't own much, but they owe over $92,000 in debt and over $5,000 in credit card. Contrast that to the 1940s, where if you owed about $500, that was about it. That was about as much as you owed. So this issue of debt is huge. This issue, because as the scripture said, the borrower is slave to the lender. Let me talk about the nature of debt and maybe give you a perspective that you haven't thought of before. What debt is really doing is this. Let's say I get a credit card and I borrow $1,000, and now I'm going to pay that $1,000 off over the course of time. Naturally, the credit card company wants my interest payment. So they're really not looking for me to pay this off in 2 months or 3 months. They want me to pay this off in years, because they know if I make the minimum payments, it will take me years and years to pay off the credit card. It used to be the average card, if you only paid the minimum payment, took you, I think, about 27 years to pay off the card. And by the time you paid it off, you owed 2 to 3 times as much as what you had originally borrowed. So the nature of debt is this. What you're actually doing, you're not only just borrowing money from a company, credit card company or a bank. What you're really doing is you are actually impacting all of your future earnings. So if I borrow $1,000 today and I have to make a $30 payment per month for the next 5 years, let's say, that means next month I have $30 less. And the month after that, I have $30 less. And 5 years from now, November 2026, 2027, whatever it is, there's $30 from way down the road that I've already made a commitment to today. You say, well, Carlos, that's not a big deal. It's $30. I understand that. But when you add up a couple of credit cards, a couple of store cards, when you add up your maybe a home loan, an auto loan, when you start putting all those debts together, what's happened is this. Most of the earnings that you're going to make next month, and most of the earnings that you're going to have next year, and 2 years from now, and maybe even 5 years from now, you have already spent it today. And the other way to look at it is this. If your money is tight today and you're making payments on loans and credit cards and such, it's probably because of a decision that you made a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, or 10 years ago. You made decisions way back then that are making your financial situation today very, very difficult in many cases. And in the same way, there could be decisions that you are making today that are going to negatively impact your life 2, 3, and 5 years from now. I recall during my early years in the workforce, I always used to think, when I was making $20,000, I said, okay, I'm doing all right. But boy, if I can make 25, I would be set. Right now it's tight, but give me an extra 5 and I'll be so set. I'll be able to do what I want. I'll have the freedom to get the things that I want. And then guess what? I was making 25,000. You know what I was saying? Boy, if I can only make 30. If I made 30,000, boy, that would be amazing to make 30,000. And then I was making 30. When I was making 30, guess what I was saying? Boy, if I can only make 50. And when I was making 50, guess what I would say? Boy, if only I can make 75. And when I was there, guess what? I was saying, if only I can make 100. And it kept on that way. And so at every financial stage and level of my life, I was in debt. And the borrower is slave to the lender. I was indebted all the way through that process. And really, from a very practical place, the saddest part about this, there were times I was making actually very good money. I was in management. I had a good job. I was making good money. And I couldn't get myself some of the very basic necessities. I remember I had a leather coat that had some paint on it and had the pockets like torn out at the seams. I mean, it was a nice coat at one time, but it was at the point where it was ragged and kind of ugly. I wore that coat probably for 7 years. And for a couple of years towards the end, I remember thinking, I want to go down to Orchard Street in New York and get myself a new leather. And you know what? I couldn't do it. Even though I was making good money, and I couldn't do it because I had credit card payments and I had debt payments, and I wanted to be responsible, so I was doing the right thing. I was paying my debt, and something as simple as a leather coat. What was a leather coat back there? $400, $500, a good leather coat? I couldn't do it, and I literally kept putting that off for several years. And that's when I really understood, wait a second, at my stage of the game, where I'm in my career and with my earnings, I should be able to do that. I should be able to get that if I desire to, and I could not because of debt. That's what debt does. The borrower is slave to the lender. I was a slave to the credit card companies and the minimum payments that I had to make. And I recall it all came crashing down on me in the mid-90s when I went through a bit of a financial crisis and I could no longer make those payments. And it had gotten so bad, at one point I had a box. The box was probably, it was a big box, maybe 18 inches wide, a foot tall, maybe a foot across. And I used to put all the credit card late payment notices in the box. I didn't even bother opening them. And I remember I kept the box, it was like a box of shame, and I kept it at my job under the desk. And every day I'd go home, I'd look in the mailbox. Remember, at one point I had, I think, 11 cards. So if I was behind on 10 of them, I would get like 10 letters every week. And so you add that up over an extended period of time. I had hundreds and hundreds of letters. It was getting phone calls at home. It was getting phone calls on the job. It was very distressing, to say the least. I came to the point in the mid-90s where I actually started the process of going through bankruptcy. I never completed the process. I actually moved to New Jersey for a short period of time. And when I was finally ready to go to court, I just happened to mention to my attorney in passing, oh, by the way, I moved and now I'm in New Jersey. And he said, well, we can't continue because the process for declaring bankruptcy in New Jersey is different than New York. You have to start over again. And so I said, oh, forget it. I'm just not even going to do that. So I'm glad I didn't declare bankruptcy, but I'm certainly sensitive to the fact that there are folks who are probably tuning in right now. And probably maybe you've declared bankruptcy, or you're considering bankruptcy, or your finances are very, very tight. And so this conversation about debt is not only for people who have had difficulty, because I hope, and I suspect there are viewers out there saying, Carlos, I've never had those issues. I've been very responsible for debt. Maybe I'm one of the few, but I've managed and I'm okay. Or maybe there's some viewers who are just starting out and say, well, I just got my first credit card. I really don't see what the big deal is yet, but I keep hearing people warning me, so I'm being very, very careful. That's a good. So that's the first. This is the end of the first episode. I want you to tune in. And what I'm doing again in this episode and the next two, giving you a little bit of a flavor, a little bit of the history, my own story, and we're going to talk a little bit more about debt in the next two episodes as well, because I really want you to see debt for exactly what it is. I I want you to tune in next time. If you've gotten something out of the content, I hope you'll support the channel. Hit the thumbs up button, even if you've done it before. Every single video that you watch, please hit the thumbs up button and consider subscribing if you have not. Leave a comment below. All these things help me out greatly in this YouTube channel. God bless you. I'll see you inside the very next video. Okay. The dog is adding her commentary about debt, dog food debt.